I guess the best place to start with the whole kind of barge discourse is the fact that Lee Anderson's been perpetually in the news because he only exists to a magnet for news stories by being deliberately obnoxious. Not only is it deliberate obnoxiousness, it's manufactured obnoxiousness, right? Is that it's being specifically done in such a way that it creates a continuous news cycle. Obviously, he's been pretty outspoken about like the migrant issues up until this point, you know. Weird how this person used to be in the Labour Party. Strange that. Imagine if Corbyn hadn't happened, Lee Anderson would still be in the Labour Party saying this stuff, so good. But it's clearly being done. He's clearly saying the things that he's saying because he knows he'll get him column inches. He knows that it'll get coverage, right? So what better way to celebrate that by giving him the coverage that he so desperately desires? Now, in the wake of all of this discourse around the barge and all of this discourse around the lefty lawyers who are obstructing the Rwanda plan, and by lefty lawyers we mean lawyers, i.e. people who know the law, because of course there's never been a party of law and order. It is just the party of order. It is just the party of the upper classes making sure that the lower classes do what they're told, right? That's what law and order really means, because when it actually comes down to real laws that actually matter, like, you know, international laws and conventions about refugees and regulations that we sign up to, for example, within the European Court of Human Rights, then it becomes obstructionism, right? As soon as you can't do whatever kind of absolutely inhumane thing it is that you want, suddenly you're being obstructed by the lefty lawyers, where laws are only good insofar as that they can be used for the benefit of conservative ideology, rather than because they have any genuine utility. But that's a story for another time. The thing that's really trying to get people riled up is to demonize the migrants for daring to come here in the first place. Lee Anderson has done this and deliberately got himself in the news by saying that the migrants should F off back to France, which has become a bit of a kind of viral story at this point, really. This was in the same kind of point that he was making. The Conservative Party have failed on immigration. Now, by both a left and a right-wing perspective, he's not wrong, right? No matter what way you view this, they have failed on this. They have deliberately failed on this. From a right-wing perspective, they have failed, first of all, because immigration is way higher than they said it would be, right? The Conservatives continually run on a platform of not wanting there to be more immigration, and then just let there be loads of immigration anyway, because they know that it's good for the economy, because it is. But they continually kind of gaslight their own voter base into thinking that they're going to have a grip on immigration when they never do. And second of all, the boats haven't stopped. The boat numbers are still pretty high, and the idea of there being a Rwanda plan or an Ascension Island plan or the barge plan, none of these things have acted as a deterrent. So the boats haven't stopped, apart from, of course, what we'll find out later, the barge itself has stopped, but that's for later on in the stream today. He's right that they failed from their own perspective, because, you know, the numbers of immigration, it's still going up, and the boats are still coming, and none of the deterrents have worked, right? But from a left-wing perspective, they failed on their own basis of what they were trying to use this for. They were trying to use the stop the boats rhetoric as being their wedge issue between them and the Labour Party, in that they believe somewhat that the Labour Party has at least a functioning moral compass, which of course they don't. They don't have a functioning moral compass, which is why they've been backing up the Conservative Party on this rhetoric for the entire period of this time. Right? It's supposed to be a wedge issue where they could say, look, everyone focus on the boats. Let's stop thinking about the economic crisis. Let's only focus on the small boats crisis or whatever it is. And then by the time the next election rolls around, they will have fixed the boat crisis, and they go, look, you can trust us on immigration, whereas if the Labour Party in charge, you couldn't trust them. And they failed on that as well, right? It was supposed to be this big electioneering thing that they were doing to try and get a big distinction between them and the opposition, and also to make it look like there was a problem that they'd actually solved, when of course, first of all, it's a problem of their own making, because the reason why there is the crisis of irregular migrations, what that's the official title of the small boats, is the irregular migration, is because they've not opened safe and legal routes for asylum seekers. I say safe and legal, I really mean safe, because any route that you get to any country to claim asylum is indeed a legal one. You are not illegal if you arrive on a small boat and then if you claim asylum. You only become illegal if your asylum claim gets rejected and then you don't leave. That's when you start becoming illegal. The act of getting there is absolutely legal as long as you do indeed claim asylum. But they made sure that there was going to be irregular migration by making regular migration completely impossible. Right? Even the ones we have schemes for, like Syria and Afghanistan, are so mired in paperwork that very few people actually go through these schemes anyway, which shows because a load of the people arriving in boats come from Syria and Afghanistan, you know, countries that we have bombed within the last 30 years. So I don't really think that there's any kind of justification for not having properly accessible routes to get here to break the demand of the people smugglers who are making all this money in the first place, right? Their failed plans and their lack of ability to want to actually properly fix the demand issue by opening up these routes just shows that they are happy to feed demand for these people smuggling gangs, which shows you again just how warped the moral compass of our entire political establishment is. So they failed by creating the crisis, they failed to use it for political gain, and they failed at solving the crisis. So they failed in every single metric, no matter which political philosophy that you subscribe to, which is a kind of pretty spectacular failure. Now, Lee Anderson, after his comments about telling these people to F off back to France, which of course they have no need to do so, because you don't have to claim asylum in the first safe country you get to. France isn't even the first safe country most of them have arrived at. But of course, if we only wanted people to go to the first safe country, then literally every single refugee would end up in countries bordering the state of the conflict. When you look at, for example, the Syrian conflict, most Syrian migrants have ended up in Turkey. That's what the election was fought on, right? Between Kılıçdaroğlu and Erdogan, was just about how do we get rid of all of these refugees, because they've all ended up mostly in the first country that they've arrived at, which would have been Turkey or Lebanon. The fact that we have factors of 10 fewer refugees than Syria, it is illustrative of the fact that people do mostly stay in the first safe country. But if every single country apart from the first safe country said that, then every single refugee would just end up in countries surrounding the area of the conflict. The whole point in the UN Convention on Human Rights and the Refugee Convention is specifically so that the burden of dealing with asylum claims is fairly shared between plenty of other states that have the ability to be able to pick up the slack. That's the whole point of all of this. So they don't need to F off back to France. But he's been on the Farage show on GB News defending his comments. So let's have a listen.
Lee Anderson is a Conservative Member of Parliament for Ashfield. He is Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party. He's also a GB News presenter on Friday evenings. And Lee joins me.
The reason why he's deputy chair of the Conservative Party is specifically so that he can be this kind of cringe magnet. He can be this kind of figure that they use to trot out the culture war. He's not been a Conservative MP for very long. In fact, it's almost performative that they have chosen a defector to be deputy chair. It's not a job with any kind of real power, but it does give him like this sense of perceived legitimacy that he's speaking as a spokesperson of the government when he says these things that's supposed to be red meat to working class red wall voters. When of course he's all, as I mentioned in a segment I did months ago, he's just a caricature of what posh people in Westminster think all working class people are like. Right? And that there's this classism that comes from both liberals and conservatives, where liberals think that all working class people are people who have bigoted opinions or who are unwelcoming to immigrants or whatever it might be, whatever these kind of stereotypical ideas are. And they think that it's bad that they think that. They think that the liberals think that working class people are completely uncultured. And that's why they believe these things. Yet they are the enlightened liberals. And conservatives know they agree. So they think, well, actually, no, we're sticking up for the common man by being draconian and bigoted, whatever it might be. When really and truly there is no single unifying ideology between working class people, right? The working class are not a monolith. He's not some kind of spokesperson for the silent majority. Given, right, there's a slim majority of people who do support things like the barge and do support like the Rwanda plan, but these people come from across the political spectrum and on both sides of this particular debate. And the idea that you can just completely stereotype all working class people into being literally innocent, it just shows how classist the political class in this country really are.
Down the line from his constituency, Lee, not for the first time, you have caused total and utter outrage. I listened to the Today programme on the BBC. They were barely able to control themselves because you've told illegal immigrants to F off back to France if they don't like going on the barges, the Bibby Stockholm, in Portland Harbour. Lee, you know, all of us at times in life go a bit too far and we need to admit perhaps we've made a bit of a mistake. Are you apologising for the words you've uttered?
No. I'll tell you what it was, Nigel. It's born out of frustration. It's born out of me being absolutely furious. Not just me that's being furious, my constituents and millions of people up and down the country, and I guess including yourself in this as well. They are furious the fact that these, and I hate the word asylum seekers because they're not, they're illegal economic migrants.
You have actually zero evidence for this. You have no evidence at all for this. In fact, most of them all do claim asylum. And I think if my memory serves me correctly, the percentage of these arrivals, these irregular migrants who come here, I think it's like 70 or 75%. of their asylum claims get accepted once they go through the appeals process. But of course, he'll blame that on the lefty lawyers and the people trying to sneak people through the asylum system, because of course they can't just admit that in fact they might be wrong about something. There has to be some kind of fifth columnist who's ruining everything. No evidence at all that these are economic migrants or that they're not asylum seekers. And in fact, asylum seeker does not necessarily mean that they have a genuine asylum claim. It means that they want to get put into the queue to have their asylum claim heard. That's what I've always said when it comes to this debate. It does not matter whether you believe that we should be draconian on our asylum acceptance, or whether we should be lenient on asylum acceptance. Because where you lie on that particular distribution doesn't change what your policy should be around the small boat crossings. Because there's an asylum backlog due to austerity, and the small boat crossings are due to a lack of safe routes for people to get here to claim asylum normally. Those are the issues with the backlog and with the small boat crossings. Because even if you believe that we should be super draconian and only accept a very small number of asylum seekers, only ratify a small number of claims, the way you deal with this is you get people onto the island, you put them quickly through the asylum claim system, and if their claim gets rejected, you deport them back to their country of origin. That's not a view that I ascribe to, but that should be the view that right-wingers should be taking on this. If they really do want to stop the boats and want to get through the backlog and stop spending money on hotels, you'd fund the asylum claim system, but they don't want to do that, do they? 'Cause that's not politically efficacious for them.
And they're being enabled by these charities. And the nerve of it, Nigel, I've been to Calais. I've seen these migrants living in one-man tents, living in absolute squalor. Then they get here and we do our best. We bend over backwards to put them in decent accommodation. And all of a sudden they get a choice. Let's not forget, Nigel, this barge, we've got workmen in the oil industry, grafters, living on these barges, doing a good job for this great country of ours.
I love how, right, their defense mechanism for this, because we're going to come to the conditions of the barge itself later on, and what they do this continual thing, Conservatives, where they will try and make people that they want to support them give up things that they have to ensure that someone else stops having it as well. So when it comes to, for example, this drive to leave the European Convention on Human Rights, they'll try and sell it to people by saying, well, you know, I promise we won't use this to attack your human rights that you now don't have because of leaving the ECHR. We'll only use it on this outgroup that you dislike, right? When, of course, you know, if you lose those protections, you don't have those protections anymore. It's as simple as that. So leaving the ECHR is really important for everybody, regardless of whether you're an asylum seeker or a British citizen, because it protects you from so many things. But people will cut off their nose to spite their face as long as that they know that people that they dislike will get hit by it, even if it takes away stuff from them as well. And the same way when it comes to this, they'll say things like, well, it's perfect because we allow British people to work on oil rigs by staying here. And I'm like, if this is the case, where it's not even fit for refugees now, not even fit for asylum seekers, it was never fit for people working on oil rigs in the first place. But of course, they'll go, you know, actually, the garbage conditions people have put us in, they're fine for me, so they should be fine for everybody else. I'm like, no, how about instead, we have some sense of solidarity here and say, actually, no, it's bad. It's bad that British workers were being put on Bibby Stockholm previously, obviously based upon its actual capacity, rather than overfilled to a factor of 2, which is what the Conservatives want to do for migrants on the Bibby Stockholm. Even then, I'm like, if it's not fit for refugees, it was never fit for our workers in the first place either. So what you're saying is that bacterial infested barges are fine for British workers, and spoiler alertly, they're not. And if you really cared for working class people, you'd actually say, and you'd agree with me and say that no British worker should be forced to live on a barge which is infected with Legionella bacteria.
It makes me sick to the pit of my stomach when these lefty lawyers, the charities, the human rights campaigners saying it's not good enough. And like I say, if it's not good enough, then it should go back to France.
Lee, we've got you as a party deputy chairman. We've got the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. We've got lots of tough talk. And yet, let's be frank, let's be honest, it's your government, which you've been there in the Commons since 2019. You have overseen this total failure. And you may use the F word. And Suella may talk about life sentences for dodgy solicitors. But isn't the truth of it, your party has completely and utterly failed everyone.
Listen, Nigel, I'm not going to sit here and make excuses to anyone. This is out of control. We're in power at the moment. I'm as you say, the deputy chair of the Conservative Party. We're in government, and we have failed on this. There's no doubt about it. You know, we said we're going.
And see, literally what I was talking about earlier. Yeah, they created this mess themselves through defunding the asylum system and from making sure there wasn't proper routes available for people to get here. And now, Nigel Farage is completely correct. They have failed. And it's the only people that you can blame for this are the Conservative government. That's it. And you can tell they're doing it for political reasons too, right? Because they were very easy for governments both in England and in Scotland to find disused ferries to have Ukrainian refugees in, right? Refugees from the war in Ukraine. There's a really interesting story I was reading. Ukrainian refugees in Scotland had been put on disused ferries, right? And they said they loved it because, right, if you go on a cruise, like empty cruise ships there were, if you're going on a cruise, you need to have all of the amenities that you need to ensure that you can survive and have a fun time, allegedly, when you're in the middle of the ocean. And the Ukrainian refugees said, actually, yeah, we don't mind living on this ferry. They could have done that for all of these other refugees that use disused cruise ships. But that's too nice, right? That's not draconian enough for the brown people. Whereas the white people are very happy to use the disused cruise ships. But as soon as the brown people are here, then there needs to be draconian. There has to be performatively cruel. Because that's what it is. It's just performative cruelty.
Look, we have got policies in place, and I know it's a bit hard for the British public at the moment to actually understand what we're trying to do with the Rwanda flights and the changing legislation, the illegal migration bill. And it seems very slow, it's cumbersome. We're up against it, Nigel. Let's be honest. We've got the lefty lawyers, we've got the human rights campaigners, we've got the charities. Everything's against us.
Imagine being in the position where lawyers, charities, and human rights campaigners have all created this broad front against you, as well as doctors and nurses in other sectors as well. Obviously, they're all on strike at the moment. Probably come to that later on in the stream. When you realise that you've made enemies of like all the most kind of trusted people in the country, and you think, well, actually, no, they're in the wrong. I'm like, maybe it's time for a rethink, Mr. Anderson. Maybe it's time. Maybe you realise you might be in the wrong on this one. If all of these disparate groups of people as well have all come against you on this one, maybe it's time for a redo. Go back to the drawing board. Those do-gooders doing good for people. That's always been a weird insult, hasn't it? Do-gooder. I guess it's just the boomer version of trying to castigate someone for virtue signalling, right? Which, of course, is what these people are doing. Also, it's more vice signalling than virtue signalling. It's performative cruelty because it's completely unnecessary. But they know that it's a red meat for red wall voters. Now, there was a second part which almost kind of directly relate. I say almost. It does directly relate to what we've just seen, and the comments being made by Leenock Powell there. In the wake of this, there was another group of migrants crossing the Mediterranean on the south of Italy, and a bunch of them drowned after one of the boats capsized. A bit of a tragedy, really. It's a shame that it wasn't 5 billionaires with more money than sense. It might have been a global rescue effort, but hey-ho, we live and we learn. And in response to this, Diane Abbott did a tweet that she then deleted pretty quickly, where she took the phrase that Lee Anderson used about migrants effing off back to France and lampooned it with this tweet saying that the migrants have indeed effed off to the bottom of the sea, which anyone with a functioning cortex can see that specifically means a parody of Lee Anderson. Yet, of course, liberals got really mad that she used the same language because liberals don't understand content. They only understand tone, right? They are, politically incredibly credulous individuals. Of course, Jonathan Pye, being king of the liberals, has said that she's now taken the heat off of Lee Anderson. I mean, she's only taken the heat off Lee Anderson if you also believe that everyone else in the country is as dumb as you and doesn't get ironic humour. But this is the UK. Our entire humour is based on irony. It's based on sarcasm. If you don't get that this is sarcastic humour lampooning Lee Anderson, I can't help you. The tweet is in poor taste, but it's highlighting issues, but it's only in poor taste specifically because Lee Anderson was being in poor taste, right? But, I mean, maybe there's a point to what Jonathan Pye here is saying, but the fact that this is now part of the news story, I guess, does mean that doesn't necessarily mean the heat's being taken off Lee Anderson. I don't think anybody else who was previously getting angry at Lee Anderson has now said that suddenly thinks that he's in the right because Diane Abbott tweeted his own logic back at him, or tweeted his own language back at him. I don't think anyone's really doing that. But of course, Diane Abbott is continually attacked by both liberals and conservatives, being an MP who has, actual principles, real viewpoints. Now, I've taken a dim view of Diane Abbott's public persona in recent months. God knows I've had criticism on this channel for things that I've said about Diane Abbott, because I have a pretty mixed opinion of her. But that you cannot say she doesn't have principles, and whether or not she puts her foot in it with things that she says and does. In this situation, she's completely in the right. Anyone who's criticising her rather than, engaging with the point that she's making here is, of course, fridge temperature IQ. And again, just liberals can't understand the content of what she's saying here because they don't like the tone. And that's what's intensely frustrating about these people, is that they just refuse to properly contextualize anything. It is ironic that a comedian who bases his act on irony doesn't get irony. I mean, yeah, it is pretty ironic. Maybe he was being meta-ironic by being ironic about himself, not understanding the irony that he would employ in his ironic comedy sketch, but maybe it's 5D chess. But I mean, the original headline is that she's exploiting the deaths. How is she exploiting the deaths by saying that the deaths were bad? What does she have to gain from additional media exposure? Nothing. Like, if she was trying to exploit it for clout, which they must think that she was doing, why would she, what would she have to gain from it? Sad thing is, the focus is still on the tweets and not what the actual deaths were. I mean, that's true. I mean, you're right, JDM, of course, she has always been attacked for who she is and the minority groups that she belongs to. In fact, over half of all tweets at the last election, abusive tweets at members of parliament, over half of them were directed at Diane Abbott specifically, right? So she gets a lot of flack. I don't know why I'd be surprised at just how completely low the discourse has managed to get to in this country. Really, really not surprised. She's right to do so. I alluded to this earlier on in the segment, and in fact, the barge has now had to be evacuated because Legionella bacteria has been found on the barge, right? So Rishi Sunak has now stopped a boat. A boat has been stopped. A single one boat has now been stopped. Just unfortunately, it was the barge that they'd hired as a publicity stunt spectacle to try and create a media storm about it. And now it's not just the lefty lawyers and the charities and the human rights campaigners. It's now the health and safety people. You can't be there with deadly bacteria. How dare you? Can't believe they'd want to be so obstructionist by saying maybe don't put people into conditions that could give them Legionnaire's disease. But hey ho, let's have a look at the Channel 4 discussion on the now ejection of the asylum seekers from the barge, right? The kind of the asylum seeker barge hokey cokey.
The Bibby Stockholm was supposed to house up to 500 asylum seekers, but tonight that number will be 0 following the discovery of Legionella. Now, this is a bacteria that can be life-threatening under certain circumstances. Now, despite the barge being presented as a part...
And the thing is, people will hear that this is life-threatening, and they'll just go, I don't care, right? I mean, they wouldn't care about people's lives being threatened when they were crossing the channel. In fact, they never cared about these people's lives being threatened when we were invading Afghanistan and bombing Syria. So why we expect them to have the milk of human kindness just suddenly come up to these people when they're fleeing these countries, when they didn't even have it when they were in the countries in the wars that we were taking part in? Don't know why I would bother thinking that in the first place. Well, they'll just go like, it doesn't matter, I don't care if these people die, because they don't. I mean, though you saw the caller, I think Nikki Campbell was on Radio 5 Live. You took a caller from this woman saying, people have to die and that's sad, but I don't care.
Because I think, Patricia, you think we should be hard line on this. Tell us more.
I think it's very tough, and I'm sorry there will be some deaths. I truly am sorry about that, but we should not let them land. We should not let the boats land. I'm truly sorry that there will be some deaths, because when the boats turn back, there will be some deaths, and that's really, really a bad thing. But they will then stop coming. It
goes back to that Akala bit from Frankie Boyle's bit about this, where he says, looking at the Katie Hopkins point about treating these people like cockroaches, and Akala said that it's a mandate for murder because you're treating humans as less than human. And all of the rhetoric that's been surrounding this current migrant crisis, is completely testament to the kind of stuff that Akala was saying. It's the depersonalization, seeing people as less than human.
Not only was it presented as a solution, it was also seen as a symbolic gesture of the government making this country less attractive to asylum seekers. Right now, the emptying barge behind me also stands as a symbol.
That the deterrent's working very well. They spend all of this time talking about getting people to Rwanda. They then start talking about Ascension Island. After all of these gimmicks, has it acted as a deterrent? No, it's not acted as a deterrent. In fact, the only policy they've succeeded in acting as a deterrent is the Albanian returns agreement, right? Once they had agreed an Albanian returns agreement, the Albanians stopped coming because they knew they would go back. That was the single disincentive that's been put in place this entire time. The barge hasn't worked, the Rwanda plan hasn't worked, the Ascension Island plan hasn't worked, the barracks hasn't worked, the Manston detention centre, that's not worked. A returns agreement, though, that worked. But unfortunately, it's very difficult to get a returns agreement with Bashar al-Assad, which of course we shouldn't be doing because, whilst Albania is quote-unquote a safe country, Syria, that country with a 4-way civil war going on, that's not a safe country. Afghanistan, the one ruled by the Taliban, that's not a safe country. I can't think of a single reason why anybody should have their asylum claim rejected if they're fleeing from Syria or fleeing from Afghanistan. There's just no reason to reject either of these people.
Right now here in Portland, that the opposition towards the barge behind me is only going to intensify, and it's come from across the political spectrum. This is what the mayor here has had to say.
I'm shocked and horrified that human beings can be endangered in this way. We were told that all of the checks were in place and that everything was supposed to be safe, and it quite clearly isn't.
Oh, but it's good enough for oil workers. Such a lefty snowflake, worrying about people not dying. Oh, how woke of her! How woke of her to say such a thing. But it's good enough for oil workers. It's good enough for migrants. It's good enough for asylum seekers. Legionella or no Legionella, right? Back in my day, we drank from the hose and we dealt with Legionella.
Now, this is what the Home Office has had to say today. They said, following these results, the Home Office has been working closely with the UKHSA and following its advice in line with long-established public health processes and ensuring all protocol from Dorset Council's Environmental Health Team and Dorset NHS is adhered to. No individuals on board have presented with symptoms of Legionnaires, and asylum seekers are being provided with appropriate advice and support. The samples taken relate only to the water systems on the vessel itself and therefore carry no direct risk indication for the wider community of Portland, nor do they relate to fresh water entering the vessel. Now, following this, what we're likely to see is greater criticism intensifying from both sides of the political spectrum, from those who are supporting greater restrictions on immigration and those who oppose them. Those who support the government plans are raising questions over just how common...
It's not immigration though, right? People do want restrictions on immigration. They want the number of migrants to come down, but migrants are people who come here through official channels and don't claim asylum. They get a visa to get here, and then most of the time the illegal economic migrants are ones who've outstayed their visa, having come here through regular means rather than irregular means. But these people are asylum seekers, and you can have different opinions on these two things, but they're completely different spheres. People want more controls over both regular and irregular migration, but unfortunately you can't just deport people without getting into legal trouble, because it is illegal to do that based upon the international agreements that we've signed up to and in some cases helped draft in the first place. If you think that the immigration should be lower, more power to you, right? That's not an illegitimate political position to have, no matter what some people would try and tell you that it is. I disagree with you. I completely disagree with you, right? But that doesn't mean this opinion you can't hold genuinely. But what you can't do is bend reality and have stupid arguments about the way that we should deal with irregular migration when the whole source of this is the closing of the routes people would otherwise have taken before and the defunding of the asylum system. Because again, if you think that we should be less lenient with asylum claimants, right, and that we shouldn't be accepting people unless it's a really exceptional case, then you should want people to come here, whatever routes they can do, have their asylum claim heard quickly, and then sent back to their country of origin. That's the only position that you can hold here. You can't hold the position about deporting to Rwanda because it's illegal from the international agreements. You can't call them illegal migrants because that same convention that we've signed up to means that they have legal recourse to be able to get here and make the asylum claim in the first place, and they only become illegal once their asylum claims gets rejected and they don't leave. So that's not a leg that you can stand on. If you genuinely want to be draconian on this stuff, that's fine. That's a political position that you can hold. What I won't stand is for bullshit arguments and lies. If you enjoyed this video, please do consider liking and subscribing. It does help out the channel and the algorithm. And if you click the bell notification icon, it will let you know when I go live and when I upload videos. If you'd like to follow me on social media, my handle is @NoJusticeMTG, and that is Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitch, and YouTube. If you want to support my channel in a more financial manner, you can do so by becoming a member for just 99p, by super chatting, or by supporting me on Patreon, with the link is in the description of this video, and hopefully I'll catch you on the next segment.